Hello and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am Shrija Agrawal and you are watching our series Demystifying Regulation and Technology. Our dispatch today talks about antitrust and big tech. Before we deep dive into the session with this August panel, it is time to do some context setting. US President Joseph Biden recently said that capitalism without competition isn't capitalism, it is exploitation. This was after the signing of an executive order to dispel the dominance of big tech companies. President Joe Biden said recently as he signed an executive order aimed at cracking the dominance of big tech firms. Big tech have had a scramble of power over who controls cyberspace, with conglomerates becoming highly profitable that have gained a massive foothold with hundreds of millions of users. And so the behemoths have massive dominion over consumers and the economy. This perverse power means that people, economies, and nations are struggling to figure out how to combat these big tech companies. It seems like as if there's no accountability, it seems to have rendered a bigger gap in inequality and lack of opportunity, and it's not a problem familiar only to India. In the US, congressional hearings with figures like Sundar Pichai and Mark Zuckerberg left us even more confused. Misinformation continued to spread at a faster pace after the pandemic. Conservatives claims to have been constantly censored. Former US President Donald Trump had his account suspended on Twitter, which was denounced by many, including Chancellor of Germany Angela Merkel and rapper Nicki Minaj claimed to have been put in Twitter jail after a tweet on vaccines. There's a worry that these companies, being so big, they're able to easily collect swathes of personal information and data of consumers, acquire competitors and fledgling companies, and have a competitive advantage against smaller businesses trying to stay afloat. Antitrust laws aim to curb monopolies and maintain competitiveness, augment scrutiny of new mergers, and be on the lookout for anti competitive strategies enforced by big tech. Coming to India, we have seen a noticeable amount of antitrust cases against big tech enterprises like Google and Amazon being investigated by the Competition Commission of India, which have left these enterprises unscathed. At one point in time, Google was fined 136 crores by the CCR, as it believed that Google abused its dominant position with search bias. However, this fine was revoked by the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal later. Even policies have been attempted to be implemented to combat this oligopoly and, in some cases, monopoly that big tech has. There were amendments to consumer protection rules to increase the compliance burden for Flipkart and Amazon and IT intermediary rules for companies like Twitter and Facebook. With worries of infringement of privacy and surveillance capital abound, this seems like a pragmatic concern to have. Is big tech too big? Does it have too much power? Could there be a level playing field? Will there be regulation in India that would actually impact these conglomerates and get them to amend certain behaviors? With the Indian government adopting technological capabilities, does this also mean there's unfettered access to layers and layers of personal data of Indian citizens that is largely unchecked? Should there be so much concentration of power that could promote or suppress as per their wishes? Should big tech really be allowed to cherry pick what is and isn't fair, thus making them the ultimate arbiter of what constitutes free speech? What's the transparency we see here? To break it all down, we have with us Anisha Chand and Rahul Singh, partners at Ketan and Company. Anisha and Rahul, it's my sheer pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to this show. I think it's a good idea to begin with what we are seeing increasingly making the noise currently. In the recent years, we have heard many politicians in the US, like Senator Sanders, talk about breaking up Facebook and the FTC. And 46 US states have sued Facebook for illegal monopolization by buying WhatsApp, Instagram, and other competitors. What do you think the future of that lawsuit is? And do you think a company like Facebook could actually be broken up? I'll begin with you, Rahul, and then get on to Anisha.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure. And these questions, of course, Shrija, as you pointed out, they are very important questions of our times. They are not just important questions, I suppose they're also very complex questions. Because as you pointed out, the political dimensions of antitrust and big tech, when you were talking about President Biden's signing the executive order. In the same breath, however, you also pointed out about the role of the courts and how many of these states have initiated these proceedings against the big tech companies. Therein lies possibly the complexity and the layers of complexity that big tech has. On one hand, there is the political dimension, which one can see from the president as well as the senators, which is coming about in the US. On the other hand, there is this role of the courts, right? And therefore, when you say, can you predict what's a crystal ball gazing is always fraught with danger. But if I were to speculate, my guess is this, that unlike the Indian context, the courts in the US will assert the idea of rule of law, and they are not going to be influenced so much by what is happening in the political space. My suspicion is that the courts will continue to take a hard look at what the US antitrust law is, and merely because a bunch of politicians are saying certain things about big tech may not really matter for the purposes of the court proceedings. Just as a quick instance, you must have seen what happened in the court vis-a-vis the Apple, the battle of the two Tims, that is, right? Tim Cook on one hand, and the other hand, you had the Fortnite Tim. So, and you saw that the judge really took a very independent stance in terms of which side has violated or not violated antitrust law, while the judge actually spoke about a bunch of things. Overall, on balance, it looks like one of the big techs, which is Apple in this particular context, was not seen to be violating the US antitrust law in the same manner as Fortnite was speaking about. So let me pause over there and hand it back to you.
Anisha, you want to add to what Rahul just mentioned? He has really sort of said that the importance of courts could not be undermined. And unlike in India, we could perhaps see a different scenario in the US.
Right. So I think just to add, all of this right now is of course a little speculative, but I think I'm going to defer to what has happened in the past. So it's while it is rare that entities have been broken up, it's not like it hasn't happened at all, right? So there was, and this is especially true for the US. Like for instance, there was AT&T that was broken up into these bells, and there was a lot of speculation whether it's a good thing that has been done or not. But ultimately, I think there were pros and cons. So what had happened was, of course, things were very different. It was not a digital market, but it was still telecom and media. And I think some of the negative effects that were for everyone to see was that there was a decline in quality. But on the other hand, there were certain pro-competitive effects that people could see, that because there was excessive price competition, right? Similarly, if we look at the tech space by itself, there was Microsoft in the 2000s, which was alleged, where there was an allegation that there is heavy monopolization. I think the difference between a Facebook and Microsoft was really in terms of Microsoft was more organic. It grew because of its own innovations and ingenuity, whereas Facebook has grown, of course, by itself, not to say that they haven't grown by their own innovations and the technology that they have advanced, but they have also grown inorganically by acquiring potential threats, as we see in a lot of these discussions at the political corridors of the US. So they've grown by acquiring a WhatsApp, they've grown by acquiring an Instagram. There was also, I remember clearly, there was a bid to acquire Snapchat, because that's another platform which closely sort of competes in the similar space as Facebook. So I think in that context, there is a difference. And the reason why divestiture or breaking up or unbinding of Facebook is being talked about is because there is no denying that it has become a data giant. And apart from just having concerns that they are building profiles and they're monitoring people and surveilling people, there have been actual calamities, so to speak, that have happened. And I think Cambridge Analytica scam is testimony to that, right? It has had political repercussions, which is why there is that much political interest in the subject. I think secondly, like you rightly pointed out, there is of course clear intersection with privacy issues. In fact, the Competition Commission of India, as you know, and we can speak about this in much detail perhaps later, but just to touch upon this point here, WhatsApp is being investigated for the updated privacy policy that they had launched. And the problem there was that it was take it or leave it, right? There was no option really or choice being given to the consumers to opt in favor of WhatsApp sharing all of the user data with Facebook. And obviously, I think the objective there is very clear. There is suspicion in the minds of all regulators, not just the Indian regulator, that this data, and we have to go back and see what kind of data we share actually on WhatsApp. We're sharing, of course, our chats, we're sharing links, we're sharing documents, we're sharing photographs, location. They're just a suite of data that we share, and all of this data can be actually utilized by them to further have targeted advertisements, right? And that's the reason why they want to be sure that apart from just being a privacy policy violation where user consent is really not by choice, it's not free, it is being coerced because I want to use a particular service, and therefore as a precondition to utilize that service, I need to agree to their terms and conditions, no matter how unfair they prima facie seem to be. And that's the problem. And like I explained, I think the theory of harm is that privacy is being compromised of personal users, of users, of course. And second is that you're going to use that again to leverage and further build on and cement your already well fortified market position in targeted advertising. But I think just to sort of go back to your question, what are my thoughts on whether Facebook is going to break up? I think there are a lot of things that one needs to factor into. One is, what is the market definition? And I'm talking a little antitrust here because that's the topic. But market definition has to be closely seen. And I had cursorily seen what the submissions were before the District Court of Columbia. And what I understand is that the market definition is very narrowly defined to say personal social networking, right? And in that market, there is only Snapchat that actually fits the bill. There is no Reddit, there is no Twitter. None of these actually fit. And so I think the first challenge would be really to see whether in that particular market Facebook really is dominant. Second, which always remains a concern in technology markets, is how do you unentangle and disintegrate technology, which on the face of it, and especially from a user perspective, may seem very distinct and separated. But behind that ecosystem, there is a back-end technology which is fully integrated, right? And just to give you an example, I use Instagram. I don't use so much Facebook, but every time I put a picture on Instagram, it tells me, do you want to share this picture on Facebook, right? What does that show? It means that the apps are fully integrated. There is seamless transition and interoperability, so to speak, between both the apps. Similarly, even with WhatsApp, there are functionalities which say share with, so there is a share external and there is a share with WhatsApp. And when I say share external, it leads me to a Gmail. But when I say a regular share, it shows me Facebook, it shows me Instagram. So what does that mean? I think that inherently means that the technologies at the back end, the infrastructure is fully integrated, and it is hard to say how much time it's going to take to unentangle these, right? And whether it is really worth it to put in that much of effort. And I'm pretty sure that unentangling and disintegrating may not be a barrier that is insurmountable, but the question is whether it's worth it. I think the second thing that's important, and that comes again from experience, is whenever you are breaking up a dominant, so to speak, entity, you have to look at a viable purchaser, right? The idea behind breaking up an entity is really that you sort of dilute the power that the entity you're breaking up is concerned. You dilute its power, and you give part of that asset or business to another person who will be an effective rival or competitor in the market to constrain the market conduct or practices of the dominant entity who was being wound up in the first place. So I think the other challenge is going to be to find a suitor who promises to have the financial resources, the expertise, the willingness, and the incentive to sort of develop and innovate. An Instagram, assuming hypothetically speaking, it's divested, and whether it's going to stand on its own footing and be that competitor for Facebook that is really required in the market, right?
Okay.
Um, Yes, I
Thanks for
think
that, Tanisha. Yeah, so we
that's
spoke about
right.
quite a few aspects, and it's a long answer, and we have quite a few areas to cover. So I do get your point that the data giant and disintegration has to come with a lot of thinking. That if you dismantle a giant like Facebook and you call it a data giant, you also have to be very, very, very of the fact that will they be buyers, the subparts it is conglomerated. So those parts have come to the fore now. The larger question here, and for a population like ours, which is most of it is not necessarily that literate, but it understands and invariably presses the button, I agree, where we are willingly giving that power to that technology company, how it is using our data and selling that data to a multitude of advertisers. So that becomes the misuse of power then. When there's consent, then it is fine. And that to consent to what extent? Consent to use my data in what form, I'm not sure, is not necessarily understood by a lot of people. And which is where this entire narrative of how the big tech should use our data comes to the fore. But that's like I pointed out, is a growing debate, it's an interesting debate. And that sort of really talks about this question of too much power. What really is too much power? And it's good to have this discussion where interesting ideas are coming to the fore and their arguments and ideas coming to the drawing board. How do you define too much power? How much power becomes too much power? At what stage can one tolerate that? And what has the development in the US in terms of too much power meant for India and creating a level playing field? I will give you an example, for instance. I don't know, but at home, when I talk with somebody on mental health issues or something which are very, very private, I do see my Facebook or Instagram throwing me such recommendations. So I don't really know how much can I really, really protect my data or my own preferences. Isn't that too much of power in the hand of a device or in the hand of a technology company to an extent of dictating my personal life? So I would like to understand the views of this panel here because these are very important questions to be discussed, and I'm glad that we have a forum like this to bring new ideas to the fore here. Yeah. So maybe Anisha, you could begin on this one, and then I'll get on to Rahul.
Right. So I think again, I'll talk about the Indian context, and I think the Indian antitrust tax landscape is still considered to be in its nascency, and hasn't really exhibited, a trend in a way. India certainly has been taking a lot of cues from its overseas peers in a bid to creating level playing field. But I think um, I would like to talk about a few maybe cases in India, and I think the first case that I would like to talk about, perhaps in a very brief manner, is the investigation against Google, right? And this is, I mean, there are a lot of cases, but I think this one is which mandates all the OEMs or the smartphone manufacturers to exclusively pre-install Google's suite of applications in the phone itself before they are sold. So the allegation really is that the Google is really tying in its applications and services such as Google Chrome, YouTube, search, maps. All of these are being sort of pre-installed, and this is again a precondition for any OEM or smartphone manufacturer who wants to use an Android platform or Android license given by Google, right? This case has gone into investigation. On the other hand, this is again Google, where, but here there was no sort of violation that was found, and the commission actually acquitted Google of all the allegations. But it's interesting because we're talking about the same entity, and pretty much it is sort of acknowledged that there is dominance of Google in a lot of markets. Of course, I think the online web search continues to be the market where Google is definitely dominating. But apart from that, there are other neighboring markets as well, right? So, in this particular case, there was a discussion about integration of Google Meet, right? That's a video conferencing application with Gmail, and the CCI actually found that Gmail was not really abusing its dominant position because there are a bunch of other video conferencing services. There was no bundling or tie-in, which means that a person didn't need to have a Gmail account to use the services of Google Meet, and therefore the allegation of abuse was really untenable. And what Google also argued is, I'm trying to here meet competition because there are other players like Microsoft and Facebook who have this application. I don't. So I don't want to be behind the race, and I want to add a feature. And as long as there is no bundling and tying and requiring all Gmail users to compulsorily use, Google Meet, there is really no theory of harm, or there is no adverse effect, so to speak, on the market, right? So I mean, it's hard. I mean, I think there's a combination of decisional practices that are trying to ensure that there is a level playing field being created. At the same time, I think there is also, like you mentioned, Shrija, in your earlier discourse, that there are a lot of regulations and legislations in the market which are trying to somewhere tame and rein in the power that this these big tech companies are exercising and wielding in our day-to-day lives, right? And I think all of them have to sort of work together to ensure that there is a measured approach that is being taken in, such that there isn't, the big tech companies are not they're not reprimanded for bringing in the kind of innovation and cost savings and all the good things they have brought us in our lives. And at the same time, there is timely intervention where we feel that they have gotten excessive power, and now they are misusing and exploiting this to the disadvantage of maybe other competitors or other stakeholders in the same value chain. So that's my answer, Shrija. Over to you.
Thanks. Anisha clearly is a big fan of big tech. And I can see that from your responses. Nobody is asking about reprimanding big tech, but the penalization of big tech as to what they do is a discourse which needs to be understood in a very, very nuanced fashion, as you rightly put. But I think the ability to not favor big tech comes from a position of the consumer's understanding of too much power. And I understand what really is happening from a consumer point of view. If you look at Google, for instance, where on earth is Google not there? You tell me. I mean, the search engine, as your Gmail service, as your application service to conduct voice calls. And to me, it appears that they are perhaps, or companies of that size and order, big tech, is getting away with the legalese, is getting away with the technicalities. But to the consumer, to the end user, one can totally see it is an absolutely no denying too much power in the hands of a very handful companies, literally dominating the world scene on how we speak, what we eat, how we should be going about our holiday destination, speaking, eating, everything. So the new order of the day is techno solutionism. We are looking as increasingly as we look at technology for solutions in everything in our lives, big tech is going to dominate everything that we do. I wonder what is your response to this, Rahul? Do you also think that somewhere the big tech is perhaps getting away with the legalese and technicalities, whilst the abuse of power is definitely there to see?
Sure. Thank you, Shrija. I think that's, again, a very interesting question that you pose. But a couple of things over here. I think, see, when we look at big tech, of course, it's quite easy to start thinking of them as very big. But let's also remind ourselves that they are not really that old, right? When you say Google, it's early noughties, right? That's all it is. It's hardly like 20 years or so, and other companies as well. Because you pointed out on Google, and therefore I'm suggesting to look at Google in terms of number of years as well. Right? What has happened, I suspect, is that because of the pandemic which is going on, and because of the manner in which at least the middle class life revolves around tech, there also seems to be a lot of focus upon tech, right? So let's also be clear that it seems like Everybody is somehow fascinated with this idea of what is tech. Right? And when you say ideas of dominance and all, yes, for a brief while, it might appear, I suppose, that some of these entities might be becoming very big. But I mean, if one looks at them closely, I can see green shoots of massive competition coming in, right? So, for instance, if you look at search engine, right? If you can pay, and I suppose everybody who pays, they don't use Google search engine anymore. They're using Microsoft's Edge because apparently it provides for a greater level of privacy, right? Or if you are somebody who is even more concerned about privacy, earlier on you pointed out about mental health issues and then other apps picking on them, right? Now, if you're concerned so much about privacy, well, I mean, switch on to phones. Like I suppose I'm not selling Apple phones, I suppose, but nevertheless, if you switch on to iPhones, now every single app, the moment you install them with the newer updates, they ask for specific consent, not a general consent, by the way, not a bunch of legalese where they'll ask you 15 terms and whether you accept. Just one simple thing. They ask you, do you want this app to track you in terms of geolocation or not? And you can just click saying that, no, I don't. Or you can say yes while I'm using that particular application. Like, essentially, what does it mean, Shrija? I mean, the point which I'm trying to suggest here is that yes, these concerns about technology are certainly genuine. They have also become, I suppose, quite in a spotlight during the pandemic. But it also looks like the same forces of, let's say, competition, capitalism, market forces are also bringing in solutions for ourselves. And when you say, as consumers, can we control all of these? Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes, as a consumer, you can control. I suppose the tougher bit is, do you have the ability to pay for these extra features, right? And at that level, I suppose, it's not, I suppose privacy as a product is not very different from, let's say, I don't know whether you aspire to, let's say, my aspiration to own a big house in the city. Of course, I would like to have that house, but I can't really pay. Maybe something similar is about technology as well, that it's a property. So long as you have the ability to pay, then you should be able to enjoy the fruits of whatever you have invested in. Right? Back to you, Shrija. Thank you.
Okay, both interesting perspective coming from Manisha and Rahul here. So I do agree that, of course, if you want privacy, you want more sophistication, you have to pay for it, and that really is the rule of the law, the lay of the land here for technology. But for most of us who are using big tech invariably in our lives, especially in this COVID-induced growth, where digital transformation and technology seems to be so intertwined with our daily lives, perhaps this is what we have to be with. Interesting ideas and very interesting conversation till now. Let's take this conversation till forward. And let's talk from an entrepreneur perspective or a business owner perspective. As you all are seeing, that we are now in an era of super abundant capital. Capital is cheap, it's a benign capital environment, and there's nobody denying that. As an entrepreneur, what are the two or three things that I have to keep in mind which can make or mar my trajectory when it comes to antitrust? Similarly, as a private equity investor, having invested in these companies, what do you think this entire India being a major antitrust battleground spells out for the future of mergers and acquisition? It's a pretty interesting question, and I think it's relevant for a lot of our viewers watching this, especially the business leaders and the capital providers putting money behind these businesses from a longer term perspective. I can begin with you, Rahul, and get on to Anisha.
Sure, I'll say only two very quick things that I suppose everybody should keep in mind, right? One is, are there regulations that you face which inhibit your innovation, or do they promote your innovation? What do I mean by that? Essentially, you see, as a new entrepreneur, somebody who is, let's say, starting out, right? As an example, let's think of that local kirana store just before pandemic hit us. Are there ways in which technology and regulation helped that local kirana store in order to ramp it up? While we speak about big techs and whatnot, we should bear in mind that most of them were able to repivot very quickly onto online payments only because we have big tech, really, right? Because we have Google, we have Apple, who are market leaders in seamless sort of payment systems. And that's the only reason why those Kirana stores were able to quickly repivot, right? So that's first thing that I'll say. Are there these regulations which are inhibiting or are they promoting, right? The second thing I'll suggest, and this may seem a bit counterintuitive, really, right? I think competition is actually a good thing. The more competition there is, the more players there are in the market, it's actually good for everybody. Why? Because it will ensure that, as a new player in the market, I will not become complacent. I will make sure that I keep coming up with a newer and newer product in a more efficient manner. And these are the only two things which I suppose should matter for any particular country. I don't see much role of politics in terms of, what exactly capitalism is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I see a lot more role of economics, or maybe an interface between law and economics. So these are the two quick points that I would make. Back to you, Sridhar.
Yeah, Anisha, you would want to add to that. I think it's an interesting conversation. I'm not sure if Rahul fully answered the aspect on mergers and acquisition bit, but he did say that as an entrepreneur, what are the things that you need to consider. And he also seems to be a big virtue of big tech like you, and gave an example of Triana stores and how they were able to ramp up because of tech help. But just in terms of the lay of the land, when it comes to M&A opportunities, how would this antitrust really play out in those conversations?
Right, thanks. So I think just to make an overarching point, it's I think all of us have benefited from technology, and I think credit should be given where it is due. We have seen a lot of advantages. I don't mind Netflix giving me suggestions of movies that I will like based on my history. So I don't want to, prejudge the issue really. And that's why I think it's important that we hear all the voices and the balanced views, because we don't want to stifle innovation and kill technology. It has benefited us. So I think that's the overarching point. But just coming back to your question, Shrija, I think from the perspective of M&A, I do not believe, I think first of all from India perspective, and generally I can say that there's been tremendous M&A in the tech space. And of course, we've seen a boost in the last 2 years induced by the pandemic, you can say. I think the largest, about 70% chunk of the M&A deals were focused on technology sector. So you can already see that all private equity, VC funds, all financial institutions are actually bullish on these markets, which are, of course, quickly evolving and rapidly, sort of dramatically changing lives. They are bringing in new ways of doing business to existing business models, right? And that's what we call disruptive sort of innovation, which brings about a new style of doing business, and it results in a lot of efficiencies, whether cost or otherwise, right? So considering that there is evidence, enough and more evidence to state that the markets are bullish, tech is of course not seeing that there are no signs that it's going to the M&A activity is going to be any less thriving that it is today, right? And it is only promising that it's going to increase. And the reason behind that is that technology is giving us innovative solutions in a quicker and faster manner. So I don't see why, and I don't honestly see that current set of regulations how they are coming in the way, because I can say this from an antitrust perspective at least. I think the major grouse, the chief grouse of all antitrust regulators across the board, I can safely say that, has been that despite there being such a large chunk of M&A activity which is focused only on tech, what I get to review is only a handful of deals, right? And that is because perhaps something else has to be faulted for that, and that's probably the way the regulations and the legislations are worded, which is, just to explain, the thresholds perhaps are that high that all of these tech deals, they they fall through the cracks, and therefore they are not being scrutinized. Just for an example, while Facebook Instagram deal was scrutinized in the US, it was also scrutinized in Europe. India had a large user base for Instagram and WhatsApp. None of these deals were reviewed by the commission, right? So I don't think that, at least so far as the antitrust regulations are concerned, so far they have caused any hurdle in M&A deals in the tech space. However, of course, as we speak, there are certain new regulations and proposals and policy changes which are under discussion, and which are also mindful that they do not want to stifle competition. They want to encourage it because there is obvious tangible benefit that has come to both the business users as well as the end consumers. However, they are mindful of the assertions and of the things that you mentioned about they amassing that much data, which is giving them that much power that they are actually making us puppets, right? They're running our lives and we become slaves to them, and that is something that there has to be a fine balance that has to be drawn between these two rather conflicting objectives. And that's why all of us are here to have those discussions and see what can be done to course correct in a manner that is balanced, that does not kill competition, and that actually sort of in a way keeps the activities of these big tech companies under check, so that they remain accountable. So that's the framework that everybody is debating right now. I hope I've covered your questions, Shrija.
Yes, that's well said. And the intent definitely is that we shouldn't have technology. The intent is not to have technology or to stifle innovation, and one definitely sees what technology brings to the table. Just sort of spending a little bit of more time on this antitrust and M&A issue, I also wanted to pick up your brains on this, Rahul. I think there was one candid revelation coming to Manisha's perspective that not many deals come to her table from an antitrust perspective. And technology, as we have seen, has been a key harbinger of a lot of deal making, especially in the COVID-19 era that we have seen right now. But the fact of the matter, I would like to understand from a person who is not necessarily so initiated, from a consumer perspective, how does the antitrust look like the duopolies building on the consumer internet space? For instance, you have a Flipkart, so or let's say Walmart owns Flipkart and Amazon. Then you also have Uber and Ola. So how does antitrust or CCI really keep an eye on these developments?
Right. So besides the M&A bit, I mean, one should also bear in mind that while certain transactions might not be reviewed by the Competition Commission before those transactions take place, in terms of the law, and this is true all over the world, including in the advanced jurisdictions, there are also other parts of competition law which could be, in theory, utilized by the competition agencies. In fact, you will see the US does it better, I suppose. I don't know whether they do it well, but they do it better in the sense that even if, for instance, there is already an M&A approval which has come about, you might not be familiar with this case, but this involves a very niche sort of segment on blood testing and cancer elements of blood testing in Illumina case, which is going on right now in the US context. And it's quite interesting that even though the US had approved that merger earlier, right now they are reviewing it and they're asking these hard questions whether they made a mistake by approving it. So, merely because a particular M&A transaction has been approved, in theory, it should not really dissuade or hobble the competition agency from revisiting those transactions. And all of these review or revisit happens from exactly the framework that Srija, you had been pointing out, which is what is the ultimate impact on the consumers? I mean, are they benefiting? Are they not benefiting? And those are the hard questions which the competition agency has to ask. And I'm not sure whether the law hobbles them. It may be, I mean, there might be a bunch of other reasons, but it doesn't look like law is something which is somehow, impeding the abilities of the competition agency to look at consumer welfare. Back to you, Shrija. Thank you.
That's very well said. Also, so I think let's just spend some time on the role of CCI here. Rahul, you mentioned that it will be foolhardy to believe that the CCI's role will only begin with the beginning of the transaction. There have been instances where the Competition Commission or the antitrust regulator has also intervened in matters after mergers have done, and they're having to review the decision merely on the impact of what Chile's impact on the consumer. That's a big question, just why we're having this conversation. So let me sort of start with you. What, in your opinion, do you think the CCI needs to do to better effectively regulate the big tech? What remedies are currently missing to address abusive conduct? What legislative and policy tools do we need to scrutinize digital platforms? Some have in fact said that the CCI is only reactive and not proactive. Do you see this to be the case?
So I agree broadly. I think CCI can be a bit more proactive. And let me explain that a bit. What do I mean by it? It's not because the legislation does not enable them. In fact, they have started using that ability of late, which is called the market studies, right? A market studies report gives them a ringside view of a particular sector. It also enables them to ask a bunch of questions to the market players and figure out what is going on. They have done it in tech segment earlier. They have also done it in pharmaceutical segment. But let me use an example where they have not done it to emphasize this point. Right? Let's say, when a question was raised about, let's say, interface between non-price benefits of tech and competition law, for instance, privacy. Right? Now, one good way to understand what could be implications of privacy on competition law segment and something which CCI could have utilized instead of, let's say, some kind of an adversarial initiative which is going on, a market studies report whereby, all sorts of stakeholders, including consumers, right? Because the moment you have an adversarial case, it sort of becomes confidential, it gets limited between the parties who are involved. But if there is a market study report which is going on, then a larger number of people can participate, including the end user consumers, and they can go to CCI and tell them as to what their concerns are. And therefore, I do agree that CCI must ensure that they utilize these so-called ex ante or before the event pass even more aggressively. To my mind, one good example is the market study report, and I think they should use it more effectively by involving larger number of stakeholders. Back to you, Shrija. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rahul. Also, Nisha, I would like to understand and get your views on this, the role of CCI to better regulate big tech. And Rahul also said that he perhaps agrees with the statement that CCI could be more sort of proactive than being reactive, though they have begun doing this with the so-called market studies. What really is your view here?
So no, I completely 100% agree. But I think some other points that I would like to make that will be important cogs in this entire wheel of exercise is and this is responding to your questions because you asked about remedies and policy changes and what can the CCI do. Does the legislative framework require any changes? So I'm just going to take each of these points separately and address that. I think aside from just market studies, there is a suo motu part of the CCI to initiate cases themselves where they perceive that there could be a market distortion issue or there is an anti-competitive harm which is apparent. Um, while the commission has started to utilize that tool, I think it is, I would say, in my opinion at least, it is underutilized to an extent. It could be that it is underutilized because we know that the commission has capacity constraints. Capabilities it does definitely has. It is well equipped to take up these cases, but I think it is a little short staffed, and capacity building is something that they need to focus on. And of course, the government is going to has to consent to that. So that's one. I think second, and I'm not going to cover what Rahul has covered, but in my personal opinion, the framework needs to provide certain flexibility to the commission to even pick up those cases that do not necessarily meet the conventional thresholds, which are asset and turnover based, but pick up those transactions which prima facie seem problematic and could pose a competitive harm. Just to give you an example, there have been cases in India, for instance, when Flipkart acquired Mintra, or that those deals were not notified. Ola acquired Taxi for Sure, Zomato's acquisition of Uber Eats. Yeah, these are all significant transactions where there was no notification made, even though an oligopoly was actually getting converted into pretty much a duopoly. So I mean, I'm pretty sure that the end of it, the scenario could be very different, and the evaluation could reveal that duopolies actually compete better. And we know that from live examples, we know Coke and Pepsi are the aggressive competitors. So even though that market is effectively a duopoly, there is excessive competition. Whether it is their offerings, branding, pricing on every levels. So it's not, again, it's not, I'm not presupposing that duopolies cannot be good, they can be equally good. But the point is that there are certain mergers which on the face of it should have been examined but couldn't, because like I said, there wasn't that enabling framework for the commission to call in these transactions. And this sort of power is there in a lot of mature jurisdictions, and CSEC could, with the help of the parliament and making certain amendments, they could have this kind of power, which will make them a more effective regulator. Because once it's a done deal, from a deal perspective, to be always under that fear that, okay, tomorrow my deal may be called upon, there is no deal certainty left. The deals have been sealed, consummation has happened, but you're always in that fear that tomorrow the regulator can pick up on you and ask you to disintegrate, right? So instead of that, probably have a much more robust and sophisticated enforcement tool, which actually helps both the parties as well as the commission, the competition agency, to call upon those transactions prior to closing, review them, and then at least you will have some degree of certainty, right? So that's one. I think the last point, just in terms of what could be the remedies, again, since this session is about tech markets, I want to just very briefly talk about the Google Fitbit case that the European Commission has looked at. It has been seen by Japan, it has been seen by Australia, not India again. But in that case, I think that's a case which is seminal, and there are a lot of learnings from that. It's a deal which has opened up a lot of conversations. But I think in that deal, the fear was that Google is going to take up all the health data that Fitbit has been collecting, whether it is your heart rate, how many calories you burn, what is your lifestyle like, all of those things, and again use that for targeted advertising. So the remedy that was proposed by the European Commission, and I believe by other regulators also, was that you will have these data silos where Google will not be able to access the data, the healthcare data that Fitbit is is stores, right? And you will not use that for any targeted advertising. That was one remedy that was imposed, and this was a behavioral remedy, right? So you create data silos, you do not integrate them, and that was one remedy that was accepted. The other remedies, which again I've alluded to in our conversation earlier, is that there has to be some infrastructure sharing, perhaps some data portability requirements, which is again there in the PDP bill in India, right? The user has the right to port its data to another entity if it wants. So these are certain creative remedies that can be considered in the context of tech markets, where a divestiture or breaking up or winding up may not be the best solution, right? Because these are all, they work because of the power that they harness by interacting with each other. And therefore I think these are other sets of remedies that could be considered by regulators to again to walk that fine balance where you're not taking a radical step of breaking up something, and especially in the technology market, because it's rapidly changing and a technology can become obsolete in a month's time sometimes. So I'm going
Okay.
to end with that comment.
Okay. My last question, and let's talk about perhaps a case and something which is so omnipresent in our lives. WhatsApp, for instance. And there was a recent case where WhatsApp was probed by the CCI for privacy practices and Google for restriction. My question, and as an outsider, I want to understand this, that does CCI or do our Indian laws actually have laws? Does India actually have laws to break up monopolistic practices? That's my question. And does the Competition Act of 2002 is robust enough when it is riddled with loopholes and vague terminology? What happens if dominant companies assert they're contributing to India's economic development? This is actually an audience question. Somebody sort of reached out to me with this question. I thought I'd ask this in August panel. I'll begin with you, Rahul. Interesting question. Does India actually have laws to break up monopolistic practices?
Sure.
And it also sort of brings out the Competition Act riddled with loopholes. Yes, your view. So they get on to Anisha.
Certainly, very, very good question for simple reason that we love technology so much that we want to break it up, So, and that's something which is quite fascinating. That's how we had started. And interestingly, on that note, we are also ending, right? But that aside, what is this idea of breaking up and divestiture? It was also there in the MRTP Act 1969, by the way. So people talk about how US has it, EU has it. Well, India also had it in MRTP Act 1969. There was a power to break it up. Did they ever utilize it? Well, no. Why? Well, maybe because these are the so-called, what in Sanskrit will be called the Brahmastras, right? The last weapon, the last resort. If you start breaking up every single company, then be rest assured that, the next Google, next Facebook is not going to come to India and do business at all. And also be assured, by the way, that why is it that we don't have an Indian Google and Indian Facebook? Why is it that in a conversation like this, every single example that we have taken up is MNC, whether it is Microsoft, Apple, or every single entity? Why are they all foreign? Maybe there is something cultural. Maybe there is something that we lack. We don't probably appreciate the idea of innovation as much as we should. And therefore, while the law does not lack the power, the answer really is, little more complex in terms of interface between law and economics. There are a lot of consequences to utilizing a Brahmastra like divestiture, right? And maybe, competition agency is just being reflective. They are being nuanced. They know what the consequences of divesting or breaking up these companies could possibly be. And therefore, they are just being cautious and careful. That said, of course, rest assured that the law has the power in an appropriate case at some point of time. If there are all of the conditions, the sine qua nons are met, then, the law is not something which is coming in the way of divesting or breaking up any particular company. Right? But back to you, Shrita.
And that's pretty well said, well put, that if we start breaking up technology companies, we have to be rest assured that we will not have the Google and the Facebooks of the world coming and operating in India. To the innovation aspect, it's still debatable. Of course, India has a long journey to catch up with other mature markets like the US or China. But I think we are faring a little better in terms of deep tech products or technology companies for innovation. But definitely not yet seen a Google or a Facebook come out of India yet. And to your point, it definitely all boils on the point that also about cultural, and I do sort of agree with that. Till the 90s, we really had a mindset of making India open. We had the IT economy very export oriented. It's only now that we're talking about real products coming out of India. So we have a journey to sort of traverse there in that direction. Yeah, Anisha, I think I really liked Rahul's point on the fact that while the law has it, but if you start breaking up every company, forget the idea that the big tech will come to India. I would want to conclude with you and then go on to a quick rapid fire. It's an interesting audience question. What is your response to that?
So no, I don't think I have anything else to add. I wholeheartedly agree with what Rahul has said. The law has the provision. We have the teeth. We have the flexibility. I think the current framework that at least the Indian Competition Act has enables the Competition Commission of India to break up a company that is in a position of dominance if there are compelling circumstances, of course, and compelling evidence to that effect. But I think aside from that, there are other penal provisions as well, such as it's a regulator that can impose the highest economic penalties, and it has done that. I mean, INR 6,300 crores was imposed on collectively 11 cement companies, so that's the level that we're talking about. Google, you already mentioned, 136 crores. Maruti Suzuki recently got penalized to the tune of 200 crores of penalty. So I mean, I think there is a detrimental value that is attached to these high penalties as well. And apart from that, there are a number of other things that the commission is empowered to do, such as modify agreements, break up companies in certain cases. And it has done, for instance, modification of agreements that they have done in the past. But I think just to sort of wrap up, I don't think that the idea is for breaking up of a company is definitely a last resort remedy, which all regulators across the world try and be reticent about. But that said, that doesn't mean that it will never happen in India. It could happen. Hopefully, it won't. But the power definitely is there so far as the statute is concerned.
Okay. I think it was a great audience question, which is why I picked it up. Quick rapid fire. I'll begin with you. I think we have about a minute, so I like two questions for each of you. Rahul, if you just define to me in one sentence, and it's a philosophical question, you can be philosophy if you want, the future of capitalism, the way you see it, what would that really be?
Well, the future to my mind is greater and greater level of competition, and that's the future. And I mean in the Raghuram Rajan sense, which is that, he wrote a book, saving capitalism from capitalists. And the only way we can save it by having greater competition. That's all I mean. Because it's rapid fire questions, so it's a rapid fire answer.
Yeah, Anisha, the same question to you. The future of capitalism, what is your view? I think it's a good answer from Rahul.
Yeah, and that's why I'm just every time you ask him the question first, I have nothing else left to say. But I'll just add for whatever it's worth. I think capitalism is here to stay. I think there has to be just better amount of accountability that needs to be embedded there, and whatever we have witnessed in terms of our experience, I think it's time that we utilize all of them to have certain course correction. But capitalism is not going anywhere. I think we are headed there, and we have to accept that, embrace that. We are now hardwired to be part of for capitalism to be part of our lives. It's only that whatever we have identified to be the issues, they just need to be addressed in a manner that benefits the society as a whole.
Okay, quick answer. The dark side of technology. Observation on that.
Who are you
Over to
asking?
you,
Me?
Anisha, and then because she had a complaint from me, so I'll start with
Sure.
Anisha and then to Rahul.
The dark side of technology is, I think, what everybody is talking about. It's the social dilemma on Netflix, right? If the product is for free, that means you are the product. You don't know how little things are influencing your mind. It is actually somebody else who's dictating your choices and makes you believe that you are exercising the choice. So that, for me at least, is the dark side. And I mean, I'm making a lot of conscious effort to prevent that from happening by taking these social media breaks from time to time.
Okay, Rahul, her remedy is a
For
break.
me,
What about yours?
well, so the thing is, for me, the dark side of technology is quite interestingly too much transparency, although it sounds counterintuitive. I used to think that I don't spend as much time on social media until I put myself on screen time. And then I started realizing that, in fact, I waste a lot of time on technology. So, in that sense, for me, the dark side has been counterintuitively a very different thing, which is a lot of transparency. And hopefully, it'll help me in sort of, remedying my own behavior, forget about, tech's behavior, and therefore to be a little anti-paternalistic. The idea is to utilize it to remedy my own behavior and maybe take a little more responsibility for my own life.
Okay, thanks for that, Rahul and Nisha. We had a very meaningful conversation where a lot of ideas on antitrust and big tech came to the fore with messages from private investors, business leaders, and consumers at large. It is my dispatch to our audiences to keep watching Mint's Demystifying Regulation and Technologies with her dispatch and keep watching for more. Till the time I see you next, goodbye and good luck. Thank you.